Hi, so welcome back to my book vlog series. In this book vlog, I'm actually going to be talking about a poem, and the poem that I'm going to be talking about today is called I Too by Langston Hughes. I have it right here in this book. Okay. So before I get into the actual contents of the poem, I want to talk about the poet first because I think that a little background information is necessary to fully grasp the idea of the poem and understand what the poet was trying to convey to his audiences. So Langston Hughes, our poet today, was born in 1902 and he died in 1967. And he was an African-American man who lived during the perfect time in history to really see America begin to evolve and kind of raise a sort of equality for minority groups such as African Americans like himself. And I think that's something that really inspired his writing. We've read a couple of other Langston Hughes texts in this American literature class, and all of his writings have been about oppression and the acknowledgement of racism and discrimination and segregation that went on in America. And still continues to go on sometimes in present day. And I think that he asserts himself in his writing as a very strong individual who is able to overcome the challenges that society faces him with. But also, while uplifting himself, he also uplifts his fellow African-American communities, and he kind of acknowledges that he's not the only one, but this is how it feels first-handedly to be discriminated against and to feel that sort of segregation and just prejudice in general. So I'm going to start out by reading the poem to you, I Too by Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen, then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. So right off the bat, we notice it's a pretty short poem and it is also free verse. I think the way that he wrote this poem kind of provided for a very assertive tone and almost even a dominant tone. He starts out the poem with the first stanza, which is only one line, and that line reads, I too sing America. So with the first stanza of this poem and the first line really, we immediately notice that this poem is written from a first-person view, and the way that he uses I in the poem just really creates a personal feeling to the poem, so it kind of creates an emotional appeal almost for audiences as well. So then he begins the second stanza by saying, I am the darker brother. So here he kind of lets readers know that the speaker of the poem, which some people infer that it is Langston Hughes and other people think that Hughes was writing from someone else's perspective, but regardless, the speaker of the poem is letting audiences know that he is a person of color and most likely African American. By the speaker acknowledging his race, we can understand the depth of the poem and further grasp the meaning. And then building on the fact that the speaker acknowledges his African American race, he goes on to say, they send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. So these two lines are very symbolic of segregation for African Americans and how white families who would have slaves or indentured servants would have the African Americans cook for them, and then they had to leave the kitchen and they couldn't be in there when the rest of the guests would come. Here Langston Hughes is just providing an example of things that African Americans had to go through. So segregation is a really big part of it. And then after this, the poem reads, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. So here, in my interpretation of it, I think the poet is trying to say that the speaker is not recognized as equal with the white people, but he still is equal because he can do the same things as them. He can still laugh, he can still eat, and he can still grow strong. So although he is not socially accepted as equal, he knows that he really is on the inside. And then the third stanza of the poem switches to a different tense, and this tense is like a future tense. So he's talking about tomorrow. So this stanza says, "Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare to say to me, eat in the kitchen then." So here he's asserting his strength and a sense of independence for himself. Because although slavery was abolished in the times in which Langston Hughes lived, he still was discriminated against, and the African American race was like segregated. So although they were like in the eyes of the law like independent and free, they weren't socially free. So here he's asserting his own freedom for himself, and he's saying he's going to be in the kitchen when the company comes because it's his right, and he knows that even though society won't like it, like it's still something that he can do, and it's something that he wants to do. The idea of African Americans not being discriminated against and not being segregated has to start from somewhere. So he's starting it for himself right here and for the rest of his community. And then after this we move to the fourth stanza, and it says, "Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed." So here in this stanza, I think he's adding on to the third stanza and talking about tomorrow, which really is just the future. And he's saying that not only will the white people that discriminated against the African Americans no longer oppress the African Americans, but they will also feel ashamed for what they had done to them in the past. So here we get a sense of hope from the speaker that the white people that treated the African Americans wrongfully will understand their wrongs, and they'll come to realize that people are people despite your skin color, and it doesn't matter what you look like or where you came from, you're still a person. And then the poem ends with a very strong line, and this line reads, "I too am America." So there's a lot to unpack in this one little line. I think the speaker, as a person of color, is including himself along with the rest of his race as a part of America. So it's like kind of like metaphor, like I too am America. Like you're not actually America, but you're like including yourself, you know what I'm saying? Because like it has to start from somewhere. You have to include yourself if no one else is going to. And I think that here he's just trying to recognize himself and the rest of the African Americans as equivalent to everyone else that is socially accepted as American and truly American. I mean, if he's in America, he was born there, like he's American, man, you know what I'm saying? So I think although this poem is a concise and simple poem, it doesn't take away from the strong and deep message that Langston Hughes conveys with this poem. So I think the overall message of this poem is just, despite the dominant societal members like the white people that were surrounding him, he is still American and truly American, and he wants to be recognized as such. So in this poem, he's asserting his own freedom, his own independence, his own individualistic ideas that other Black Americans were scared to speak up for because of the previous trauma that white people had put them through. And I think, like I said earlier, if the white people were not going to include the Black Americans into the American society, like socially, then it had to start from somewhere. I think Langston Hughes' writing really did a number for influencing white Americans to open their eyes and acknowledge the Black Americans and just respect them the way that they respect people of their own race, and realize that people are people and Americans are Americans and they should be recognized as such.